Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Excellence Through Leadership Program project presentations. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to presentation day and then tomorrow graduation day. But the cohort has put in a lot of work and they have a lot of great information that they want to share with you all, so I'm not going to take up a lot of time. But to their leaders and to their direct sponsors, I say thank you very much for coming. We appreciate your support.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Scott Thomas, and I work in the Office of Research Administration. But for the Excellence Through Leadership program, I have been very lucky to be part of Cohort 1. So, pardon me while I get the clicker. I wasn't supposed to walk off screen, but I broke a rule already. Anyway, so during this, we were tasked with something. It's a great way to start it. So through this, we are tasked with centralizing the student hiring process. So that's what we'll be presenting to you through the next few minutes. But before I go forward with this and make sure this does what it's supposed to do, what am I doing? There we are. It worked. Technology. It escapes me. So it's very much my pleasure to introduce the members of Cohort 1, Andrea Corbett with School of Nursing, Alexis Hawk with Communications, Marvell Neesmith with Goizueta, who I want to give additional, shout out, if you will, for all the hospitality that Goizueta has shown us through this process. Zerka Smith with School of Medicine, Ashley Teal, Business Operations. So it's working now. Thank you. So through this, when we were given this task, one is I work in research administration. I know very little about student hiring. But what we did is we had to develop a process to evaluate how to go through this, what the university would need. So first was understanding current state. So we needed to define the student population. What defines a student? Excuse me. We conducted stakeholder interviews. I will say the stakeholders that we interviewed were very passionate, very dedicated to the student process, to making it work well for the students. We'll talk about that more later. We conducted a student survey. We'll bring that to your attention a little later in this presentation, and maybe you'll be surprised at that. The last thing that we did in this current state is a system evaluation, so different information technologies that we use. It became clear that we need to benchmark with our peers. So what are other universities that are similar competitors or whatever are doing? So we'll discuss that in great detail, but we had some nice evaluations from that. It was mostly a web evaluation. It is policies, my pardon. Then we took all this and compiled it into an analysis that we'll tell you later. And from that, we will give you the recommendations. By show of hands, how many of you during your time as working or as a student worked for a university? How many of you were student employees? Show of hands. A lot of you. How many of you have employed Emory students? Show of hands. Thank you. So I'm going to give you live from Goizueta, Cohort 1's interpretation of the student hiring process. So live. So first of all, Andrea, I had a friend named Anita Corbett. Andrea is our job posting board. Zerka is our student searching for a job. Ashley's Professor Teal that requires a student. Marvell is local HR, departmental HR. And Alexis is big HR, so data services, whatever we're going to call that. So I'm going to step back here and let this go.
All right, what do we have here? Look at all these job opportunities. Working in a lab, doing some data analyses. I might look at this.
Zerka?
Yes.
Zerka from psychology?
That's me.
It is so good to see you. Are you looking for a job?
I certainly am,
Oh, man, as luck would have it, I got the job for you.
That sounds awesome.
How about you come with me into my lab? We'll get you started. Basically, just so you know, we're going to be taking all this lab data I shared with you in our class, our psychology class. I want you to kind of transfer it into an online database, and we're going to use it to analyze information. We're going to produce papers. Your name can be on that paper.
Oh, heck yes.
It is just going to be a great opportunity, so come with me.
Excellent.
What you don't know, there's been improper documentation.
Hi, Zerka. How's it going?
Oh, it's great. I love what I'm working on, and thank you so much for offering me this job.
You've been here about a month, right?
I have, and it's a little awkward, but do I get paid for this position?
You should get paid for this position. Let me check with my colleague Marvell. He is our departmental HR rep. I'm gonna go check with him. We're gonna see what we can get worked out.
Thank you so
Don't worry,
much.
we'll take care of it. Hey, Marvell.
Hey, how you doing, Ashley?
I'm wonderful. I have a little bit of a situation.
There's nothing at this weather we can't overcome.
Oh, great. My dear friend Zerka, who came to work in my lab, she's been gotten paid.
Hasn't gotten paid. Well, has she been working long enough for the check?
Yeah, a month.
Oh, what?
Right, bi-weekly?
Let me look in the system and see.
Okay, I would love that.
I'm not finding a student record for Zerka, or employee record. I see her student record.
Jesus.
I know, I see her student record, but I don't see an employee record. Let me call Central HR
Okay.
and see what we can find out.
Thank you, I'd love that.
Ring, ring, ring.
Hello, it's Central HR. How can I help you?
It's good to hear your voice.
Oh, hi, Marvell. How can I assist you?
Well, I'm calling, I need you a favor. I'm sorry to pull you away, but I'm having problems finding a student's record.
Okay.
Can you check for me and see what you can find? Her info is blah, 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 blah,
Okay,
blah.
All right, slight problem. They're not coming up at all.
What?
So, quick question. Do you have the job requisition number?
I do. Hold on.
Okay, great.
What's the requisition number? Did you post the job?
I mean, I met her at the job posting
Oh,
before.
okay. Zerka. The student Zerka has probably not been processed properly. This is what I'm thinking.
Okay, so you don't have the job requisition number, but do you have the I-9 form that I could look up?
No I-9 because the professor hired her straight from the posting board.
Oh, okay. You know what? Without an I-9, I'm sorry, but we're just gonna have to make them go through the whole hiring process again and make sure that they get the back pay that they need. I would do that as soon as possible.
Okay, back pay it might be a stretch because she's international. But thanks, I'll be in touch.
So it becomes obvious there was improper documentation. Circa's complaining because she's missing meals, but this just, and how many of you are surprised by the complexity of getting a student hired and into the system? You'll know more shortly because I'm going to hand this over to Ashley, formerly Professor Teal.
Thank you very much. I will return to my real role, which is not a professor hiring students, although luck would have it, my office does do a little bit of student hiring, so this wasn't a completely foreign topic for me, but definitely some nuances to learn. So let me share with you kind of, as Scott mentioned, our main objective was to really define the problem, right? So when we heard what the issues were, what we tried to understand what we were dealing with as a university, we came up with kind of three main project aims. So really it was enhancing the experience for both students and staff. Obviously, you saw Professor Teal in the skit was very well intended, looking to advance the student experience for Zerka, her former student, who wanted to give an opportunity where she could have real live, experience on this campus that would help them long term. But that doesn't necessarily mean that well-intended Professor Teal knew all the steps that were required. And so that's kind of how we ended up in the situation that you just saw previously. The additional activity is addressing the inefficiencies. I think it is no secret to anyone in this room that Emory is a large, decentralized university. We have 9 schools, we have large administrative units, and oftentimes people have to find their own way to solve some of these activities. We create our own processes internally, we create our own offices internally, we do a wide range of things within our individual schools and units and not necessarily centrally on this campus. Many of you know I actually served as an internal consultant for the university, and this project really was very similar to things that we tackled in that role, again, addressing the just decentralization that we contend with every day on this campus. And then lastly, and possibly most importantly, especially to our student Zerka, is making sure that we're compliant with the processes, right? Because there's a lot of good information out there. People just don't necessarily know where to find it or know what is needed to do it unless they have someone that they can help guide them through the process. So making sure that compliance was central to this recommendation as well. So as you can see, those are kind of our project aims. And then we also had to define the population. I think many of you would be surprised how many times we had to level set as a group on what is our student population for the purposes of this project. So I'm going to state those to you right now, which we looked at the federal work-study program of employees, of students employed by Emory units. We looked at non-federal work-study, processes related to students employed by Emory units, and then graduate students employed by Emory units. There are likely student groups that fall outside of the scope of this. As an example, we have lots of master's program, PhD programs, advanced degrees that have jobs as a part of their programs. Those are excluded from this opportunity. And then also, if an employer comes onto this campus seeking our students, of course we want to make that easy for the student and the employer as well, but it wasn't necessarily a central component to the recommendations that we're going to put forward. And again, defining a student seems very straightforward until you start thinking about the complexities of this university, the number of entities on this campus that are operating, and those types of things. And additionally, one thing to remember is that students often don't stay at one school or stay within one unit when their journey as an Emory student here. So again, that speaks to the desire to really centralize this, because once I have figured it out in maybe the college, that doesn't necessarily mean I'll know what to expect when I get to nursing or vice versa. And so we want to make this a little bit easier for the students to kind of move about the cabin and get lots of experiences. Not to mention, they may want to work in units that are outside of their degree program, right? So again, they're getting a lot of different experiences that could impact them long term. Which leads me to kind of defining the process. As best we can tell, the biggest differences are really between the federal work study and the non-federal work study. You'll see I highlight in gold there handshake. It's not a handshake like I offered Zerka when I gave her the job. This is truly a system, an industry-wide system that's used to post federal work study positions. That's actually what Emory has mandated on this campus to use for all work study jobs. And this is where it gets interesting, because that's about the most centralization that we have, because any other student employee opportunity could exist in a variety of other systems, which my colleague Zerka will talk about later. Once you get past those two different entry points, which really define the two processes, you'll see there's a lot of similarities in what the student is expected to do or needs to do next. And really it comes around documentation, having the proper paperwork, and making sure they go through kind of an interview vetting process to get the job that they need. And so from a student standpoint, although we as administrators know that the funding sources are different for these positions, right? A federal work study is going to get some support from financial aid, whereas a non-federal work study student is going to be paid solely by the unit. The student shouldn't have to know what their funding source is to know what process that they're entering into, right? This should be very seamless to them. Again, not to mention that they're going to be looking for opportunities all across this campus, and it's all about enhancing the student experience, providing that one Emory opportunity for them. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Andrea, who's going to talk a little bit more about the current state here at Emory.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ashley. So where are we today? Well, last year in 2023, we hired 8,700 students across 23 units. 2/3 of those students were hired in the Emory College, Goizueta, Rollins, the Campus Life, and the Oxford College. And so I want to tell you a little bit about me. I've been with the university now a little less than 2 years. It'll be 2 years next month. And I've spent that time in the School of Nursing. And I hire students. One of the things that I've learned over the last 2 years is that how we hire students in the School of Nursing is not the process that is used across the university. And it's not that my process is wrong or that the other processes are wrong, they're just different. So in an effort to really understand the experience of hiring students, we ask the units the following questions. What is your process? Again, I learned I have a process, other units have their own process. Where do you post positions? If you'll remember in the skit, I held up a board that had different colored pieces of paper on it. Well, I pulled that picture off of the internet, but that is a very real scene on this campus. I have seen it for myself, so it is not, it's not a surprise that a student might be hired from a bulletin board. What is your onboarding like? Do you have to terminate your student at the end of every semester? And then if you like that student, you have good rapport, they do good work, you want to bring that student back, do you have to rehire them and start the process all over again? And then how does your process differ when you are hiring students with federal aid versus those without? Then we really wanted to understand, what is the process like for those who are responsible for hiring the students, those that actually do the work? And then what is the student experience like? My colleague Marvell is going to tell you about that experience.
Thank you, Andrea. Our stakeholders. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that in a few minutes, but before I do that, I do want to share a little bit with you why this particular project really took it home for me. 33 years ago, I started my first federal work-study job in a small technical college in South Carolina. And Ms. Clara Moses saw something in me and gave me the responsibility of keeping time for all of the work-study positions, for making sure that those on the payroll for work-study submitted a timesheet every week. And that sometimes meant if I had to go to the classroom and say, hey, you're supposed to turn in time, I need that by Ms. Moses. No, is looking for it, you're gonna get me in trouble. That process, I like to believe, placed me here today. I found that I had a knack for the federal work study process, for the admissions process, for the registers process. And now today in academic affairs here at Goizueta, I believe that we need to enhance our process on this campus so that other young students who do not actually, maybe aren't committed to what they want to do with their lives, may find that through the work study and the student employment process. And so with that, I'll start talking to you just a little bit about what we found out. Our constituents, which comprises of our staff, our faculty, and our students, had these things to say. Where is the student employment office? And where's the one-stop shop? This is a 15-year Band-Aid. And remember, these are all quotes from the individuals that we interviewed. Why do I have to do this twice? Students don't realize that they actually are becoming employees and not remaining students. Can't we figure out how to update an employment record that communicates with the student record? And this last one really, when we looked at the student surveys, took it home, that we actually have students that feel this way. I feel like I'm being ripped off. That is a direct quote from one of our students. We can do better, and we will do better. And by the end of this presentation, you're gonna see how many great recommendations we have for you. So as I prepare and turn this over to Zerka, so far, you probably are feeling a whole lot like we were when we were going through this process. A little dazed and confused. It even works in the clicker. Lastly, there is one other image that I'd like to leave with you. And that's the image that really reflects what it's like to, if you're a student employee, no matter if it's work study or regular direct hire or graduate student, you actually feel this way, like Alice in the rabbit hole. And all of the things that are swirling around her, the flask, the watch, the plate, the cards, the top hat, all of those things represent the vast systems and processes that a student goes through when applying for a work-study job here. Zerka?
All right, thank you, Marvell. By a quick show of hands, how many of you have experienced 285 in Spaghetti Junction here in Atlanta? Okay. So if I take you back to your first time driving through Atlanta and seeing Spaghetti Junction, you probably thought, or you probably felt a good bit of anxiety with not knowing which part of that roller coaster you were about to embark on. So as I take you through this next steps, I'd like to take you on a journey, hopefully a little bit, not as confusing as 285, but maybe just a little. We're gonna try to untangle the spaghetti and walk through the process in a little bit more detail. We're gonna use an example of Handshake, which is one of the platforms that are options here at Emory, to talk through the student hiring process here. So a job gets posted to Handshake. From there, the student is able to apply. They have two ways of doing this, via the web or an application on their phone. Then we go through the student interview process, which is great, not the bulletin board process. Then the student gets hired in the application. So within Handshake, we actually move them to a hired or no longer being considered status. Twice a week, information gets pushed of individuals who are hired back to the supervisor to let them know which of these students have been hired, and we can start the PeopleSoft experience, but also the I-9 process for compliance. This is where we may encounter our first pothole. So here is where the emails go to the students saying, this is the information and documentation you need in order to get hired. Once that information is uploaded successfully to the system, the student hire form can be completed. From there, data services will check your back, okay? They're gonna come in and check for accuracy and compliance. Then we may encounter a bit of a fender bender. From here, if the information isn't accurate and correct or incomplete, data services will start emailing you as a student and emailing the supervisor to then make sure that that correct information is uploaded. Once we have that correct information, the student is finally hired. During the onboarding process, we have asked the student to come in on a certain date, and then the student, like any other employee at Emory, has 3 days to bring in that documentation and verify it with that HR representative and the hiring manager. It gets uploaded into Equifax for review. If that doesn't happen, we've got a problem. That student is now an employee and will not get hired, and that start date may get pushed back. But let's say in this example, they did all that they should, and we're here. Today's the first day of hire, we're excited to get started. But that's not the end of the story. So what happens? Let's go back a little bit, okay? During this completion of the student hire form, there actually is a already identified termination date for the student because it's a temporary position. It may be a semester, it may be 2 semesters. Everybody's agreed upon that date. So it's here, that date is here, and we say, good luck, student, it has been wonderful having you in our office. But in reality, again, that does not happen. That student is now continuing to work for days, weeks, and then they call their HR representative and they say, hey, I haven't gotten paid. What is going on? So now we have to include data services again for retro payment or extension of a termination date or a rehire. And then all of this has to go back through the circle that we saw before, and then hopefully at that time that student has had a nice experience and they can go on their way. So a few bumps in the road that we saw, and that's not it. If we start at the beginning of a student going on Google, searching student employment at Emory, Emory has a plethora of resources. More than 5 show up on a Google search. And it's great. All of those different websites have information about federal work study, non-federal work study. Some have information about promotion and progression, what's it like to interview. Some information is also related to the hiring manager. We actually have a really wonderful how-to document, but it's not even Emory branded. So the opportunity here is to consolidate the good information that already exists into one place so it can be a lot more comprehensive and easier to read for everybody involved. The other thing we talked about too is the different platforms that we utilize here at Emory. The first I'll highlight is Handshake. Handshake is the only one that really is utilized here for federal work study students. The opportunities are for internal job postings, external job postings, and it's currently free to Emory because Handshake charges other corporations to post external jobs to this application. We can hire both undergraduate and graduates into this using this application. The only downside is it is a manual data push for student information into that system, which usually happens at the beginning of every semester. Then we've got 1220 and Simplicity. Not good for federal work study students, available for a graduate student sometimes or both undergraduate and graduate, but there's a cost, there's an enterprise cost to both of these, and we have both. And so why do we need more than one? Then we saw the bulletin board. They're in high traffic areas all over campus. They're great ways to advertise employment opportunities, but not a good systematic way to hire a student within our system. And then lastly, there's iSIMS. iSIMS is used for both Emory University and Emory Healthcare employment. It's mostly used for students for hiring a temp student, again, a termed employment, but it's not good for federal work study hires. So Handshake ends up ticking a lot of the boxes that we need, and we should consider this when we think about consolidating the number of applications that we use on campus. The last thing I'm going to hit on is compliance. On the onboarding process, I-9 verification is a federal mandate. And when we don't hit this I-9 verification, it sticks us with a sticker tag of about $2,000 per incident, sometimes more. On the offboarding, although there's not a federal mandate for what happens for terminations and passing the termination, it's actually a lot of time and resources wasted when we have to go through the process, calling, doing retro pay, and that's not something we need to be doing every time. So we have a lot of opportunity here to consolidate and become more efficient. I'm going to turn it over to Alexis now, who's going to talk through what some of our peers are doing well.
Thank you. All right, so benchmarking. When we were doing this process of research and looking at Emory and all the different ways that we hire students, a lot of the work that we were doing was really focused on empathy. So putting ourselves in the shoes of the hiring managers. What do they want? What's the problem they have to solve? How do we help them get there? The students, same thing. And I'm in communications, and in communications and marketing, one way that we refer to that is as the hero's journey. So in this particular portion of our research, we looked at what our peer institutions are doing and the hero's journey of their students as they look for employment opportunities. How do they find that information? If they have a specific idea of a kind of job they want, if they don't know what kind of a job, they just know that they need something to earn a little extra cash, how do they actually find that information? Where is that information contained on the public-facing sites of the different universities we looked at? So where do we stand among our peers? Is the process that you just saw Zerka go through in painstaking detail, is that the same at a lot of our similarly structured competitor universities? Is it the same, or are there some things people are doing that are better that we could potentially learn from and borrow from? So we looked at 16 different peer institutions that included places like Columbia University, UVA, Washington University, St. Louis, University of Southern California, and even some institutions in our own backyard, which I will talk about in a moment. So our research basically just looked at, we would put ourselves in the shoes of the student. We would Google, we would go to their website, and we would basically just pretend like we were a student looking for a job. We looked at all of their recruitment pages, the way that their communications were set up, what were their various options, and where were they being directed. 6 in particular stood out to us as places that we might want to borrow from, emulate, however you want to put it. Those were Vanderbilt, Carnegie Mellon, Northwestern University, UVA, Georgetown, and then Georgia Tech, which is, of course, an institution that we have a robust relationship with. So we will share a few examples of just some of the things that we noted were working particularly well, at least when it came to their informational infrastructure on their website. Here were some of the strengths that all of them had in common. Number one, they had one centralized, the one-stop shop that, one of the feedback came in, can we just have a single point of reference for all of this information? They had a robust landing page where you could find anything that you needed. It was a great starting point, and then followed that hero's journey to direct people very deliberately to the information they were looking for. User-friendly. It was designed in a way that our minds actually work when we're seeking out information. Carnegie Mellon. So this was actually one that I wasn't as familiar with Carnegie Mellon myself, but their student employment site, first of all, it was all centralized in one single location. There were certain categories where I felt they were really thinking hard about how would a student approach this? So handshake and not handshake was actually listed out. There was additional information. They had organized and clean lines. They also had this value statement on their centralized landing page for student employment, which talks about the value from multiple different perspectives of even, why are we going through this process? Why do we offer jobs for students? And here's what people get out of the process. We also really liked that they had a professional development program for student employees. And they had this very clear-cut, very nicely designed, simple, not overly ornate timeline of how the professional development process works. Georgia Tech, So looking through their website, looking for jobs, you can see here, that they have a drop-down menu, an accordion menu where you can click depending on what kind of student you are, what you're looking for. Resources for employers, resources for employees, very clear-cut, simple. We also liked, so they did have, obviously they have several different categories of different places you can work, but those were all listed, with an arrow to point you in the right direction, links to those places, and then the job postings themselves were all available publicly. You could, if you just wanted to do a general search and see what was out there. There were also points of contact where if a student is interested in a particular job, they can reach out to a real human being and ask more questions. They don't have to then go through 20 other pages clicking through to try to find out, okay, if I have questions, I'm not sure if I'm qualified for this, I'm not sure if I want to do this. You can actually reach out to somebody who's been appointed as the point person for that job. Georgetown, they had their student employment handbook right there on their initial landing page. They had information for new hires, information also on their peer advisors program for student employees. And this was something that we thought, could be really cool for Emory students who have been through the student employment process to actually help be an ambassador of sorts to new student employees. Okay, so for those of you that may not know, sometimes we have a little friendly competition with Vanderbilt. We're the fellow Southern Ivies. And so, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Vanderbilt is really blowing us out of the water when it comes to their student employment website. We loved that they had these very clearly marked categories of employment. Again, it was simple, comprehensive. They had beautiful photos of their students all throughout their landing page and then the subsequent pages as you click through. The information was comprehensive, but to me as a communicator, it was clear that someone had gone through and had edited it to make sure that they were only sharing as much as they needed to share. They weren't overloading you with too much complex process information right off the bat. And then it was just very well designed and very simple, very short. Probably spent 5 minutes before I found several different categories of employment that I felt a student might be looking for. And with that, we're going to go into our recommendations. What do we make of all of this? I will hand it back to Ashley.
Thank you very much. Sorry. So you're likely going to see that my recommendations are going to mirror many of the aims that we outlined at the very beginning. And before I get there, I just want to say that we did also find that Emory is doing a lot of things really well. And again, I think just really the crux of our issue is the lack of centralization. So I don't think anyone is going to be surprised by our recommendations here, which focus on kind of these 3 main points. So first of all, we do actually recommend having a centralized office that manages the student employee activities. I mean, we envision that would be a physical place on campus where students could go. Of course, it is going to be supported by a very detailed, robust website. And as you may see behind me, I guess I should scoot to this side so you can see it a little better, that this is actually a screenshot of our HR website. And I don't know if you noticed, if you've been to it lately, that box in the bottom right corner currently doesn't exist. That's why it's highlighted in yellow. It's almost as if HR knew that we were going to have this project coming forward and needed a place to kind of serve as the initial entry point to student employment at Emory University. When Zerka was talking earlier, you could see in the background some of the websites that we accessed and were able to find. There are so many good resources that do already exist on this campus. So we just envision this basically being the front door that will guide you to the different rooms of the house where you can pick up the different things that you need and kind of continue your journey on the way. And then lastly, again, implementing a single platform for hiring. Zerka's slide highlighted at least 5 or 6 different options. You can imagine as a student, that's got to be confusing, which is how you end up with people going kind of outside of the system or outside of the process. And again, not to speak critically of Emory, but it is traditionally the Emory way to buy a system if something isn't working right. And as you can see, we have done that over the course of several years. And so the idea is to hopefully try to streamline, centralize, and create kind of the industry standard for us as an institution. Again, recognizing that although we looked at peers, we do have some differences. We have some nuances. We have some things that we do need to be respectful of on our campus to make sure that we are doing what's best for our student and our supervisors and our hiring managers as well. I know many of you have listened and have thought the entire time, what is this going to cost me? And or, what can I save? And I will not call out any specific table in the room right now that is probably thinking it the most. I will also say that there's much work to be done, right? We recognize that if there's people in all the schools and units that are tackling this, we're going to have a more detailed implementation plan to identify what the true cost, what the true savings would be. But just to highlight from an earlier slide, if we're paying about $42,000 for simplicity, if we're paying about $56,000 for 1220, and we centralize to using just Handshake for all of those opportunities, that right off the bat is almost $100,000 savings. And for any of you that are currently paying license fees, you know that they're growing about 3 to 5% every year. So this number is only going to grow each year that we continue to invest in these platforms. Additionally, again, just using some kind of assumptions, if we have 9 schools and every school has someone that they're paying about $50,000 to do student hiring, they're doing student hiring just for that school. By centralizing some of those resources, we can likely see some savings and create some efficiencies, right? The more you do it, the more you know, the better you are, the better resource you can be, and the better service we can provide to the students overall. We are not advocating eliminating positions, but what we do think this does is create some opportunities for schools and units to potentially redeploy some resources that they could use to do the great work that the schools and units need done anyway. I think everyone in this room, including my colleagues, can tell you there is plenty of work to be done in the various schools and units. So we know that we need those resources and we'll continue to use them, through skill optimization for other strategic efforts and activities as well. So that's just kind of a high-level umbrella of the recommendation. Again, we just kind of see this being like the umbrella that all the other pieces will fold into. But my colleague, Andrea, is going to talk a little bit more about our do now, do next, do later suggestions as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ashley. So what do we do now? So you've heard from Ashley, you've heard from Zerka, you've heard from Alexis, and even Marvell. All of them told you in one way or another the one thing that we can do right now, and that is combine all of the student hire information into one web location. Then let's look at the effort that it takes to hire a student. Let's talk to the students. Let's engage a student focus group to vet student recommendations. Then how about creating a support structure for those that are responsible for doing the work of hiring students? And then let's think about creating a task force, a group of experts that can create a centralized student employment office that will take all of the actions, all of the efforts, all of the activities, and house them in one centralized student employment office. And then what does long-range success look like? Well, it looks like additional operational enhancements. How about we have automated communication, not only for HR, but for the student and the hiring manager. Interactive dashboards, that would be a nice touch. And then I think what is probably most important is that we invest in implementing technical solutions that can be used across multiple devices. Because what we know is that the average college student will use at least 2 devices during the course of a day to access information. And in fact, that can be said for adults, whether that's their phone and their laptop, or how about their laptop and their tablet, or how about your phone, your laptop, and your tablet. You're using all of these devices in the course of a day to access information. And so it's going to be really important for us to make sure that these devices and this information flows seamlessly across these multiple devices. Now I'm going to turn you over to Scott, and Scott is going to talk about takeaways.
So that was about 45 minutes of a distillation of a lot of work that we did with this. So Emory's not bad. Emory's actually very good. But the takeaway is we have an opportunity to be better, and that's sort of a theme that's followed through Emory. So we can enhance the student hiring process by what we've gathered. So our peer institutions have shown us, and I'm probably standing right in the way because I'm too tall, but anyway, our peers have shown us we can do better. We can take some of their examples and move forward. They probably steal from us as well, but that's a whole other situation. And just to reinforce, on this campus, there's pockets of expertise. There's so many people that were dedicated so much to this, so passionate that one of them was banging on the desk saying, let's make this better. So that's very encouraging that we can utilize what we have here to have a better process. So as we end this, I'd like to, again, I was privileged to work with an outstanding cohort of people, and I learned a lot in this. So at this time, we would like to entertain questions if you would like.
Yes.
To what extent is Handshake prepared to scale and still be free? I know Emory College uses it greatly, and I don't know that the School of Nursing uses it or any other school. Maybe I should say Graduate School of Nursing, because there are two.
Well, currently, financial aid uses it for all of their student hiring, which is for the university, the largest percent of our hiring is done through the financial aid process. So it is free. That is just their model, is that they charge the employers that hire.
And it's also the most widely used currently on campus, Handshake is, so the others are addition to.
Okay, and will Handshake be able to accommodate the increased usage, which would be kind of significant when you think of student hiring?
I don't believe that would be an issue, and it is also, we heard other universities are also using it quite frequently, so they're used to the volume, and they have a really great process too about educating not only the student on how to use the application, but the hiring manager as well. So it is a really useful resource, and the nice thing too is that it can do both internal and external job postings, which gives students the flexibility of where to look for work.
Excellent answer, thank you.
Yes, Lena.
Thank you all so much. By the way, you all did an amazing job at portraying the student experience because we hear about it all the time. And when I was looking at the data, it shows so many students are applying to be employed at Emory. And even on a kind of a conservative scenario, that could be 30 to 40% of our entire student population going through a system and a process that can be so valuable to them and ripe with opportunities. So I think the question that I have is, as you all were looking at all of the possible opportunities across, have there been any discussions? I saw that there was a professional development map out there to really lean into that model, especially as Emory thinks about pathways and how they enrich the student experience to having a purposeful pathway to get them to a career path.
So the Career Center website actually already has a lot of that information here at Emory. We do that well. But we can probably have an opportunity to enhance that. And again, I think that the confusion comes in there's so many different landing places. So compared to the student, if you compare yourself to the student or the manager, if you select on the roulette the different locations to land on at the Emory University websites, then you may not be getting the full information. So we actually do have professional development listed. I think it's on the Career Center website, but we need to do better. We need to do better as a central resourcing.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add one more note about just, what we illustrated about the disparate ways that people have entry points to student employment throughout our website and also Google. But we actually, fun fact, one of the times that we were actually, looking for, student employment at Emory, jobs at Emory, one of the top web pages that came up was a Reddit post. So just let that sink in for a minute. We definitely, and then, the library also, was one of the dominant pages that kept coming up. So it's really just a matter of coalescing and making sure we deliberately direct people to the right professional development opportunities.
And I wanted to add that the School of Nursing we have our own office where we help students plot a path. And so it really goes to the idea of centralization, because we have our own shop and we do our own to support our students. So I think that if we can offer that at an enterprise level, at a school level, university level, that more students would be benefited by the model. I know the School of Nursing, those students benefit from the model that we have. And I'm not saying that we're the best, but I think there would be value in repeating that across the university. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Our sponsor.
So, thank you. Great job. I have a question about the centralized employment office, and in your benchmarking, did you find that the top universities had that sort of in conjunction with the hiring office that sort of helped with outside employers? I mean, were those together or were they separate? Or I'm just curious how that was structured in the benchmarking, if you remember.
It varied. And so I think Emory would have to adopt a process that worked in that area specifically for us, because it did vary based on school. One of the areas that we spoke with internally was the financial aid office, which their process is very straightforward, very outlined. And so whatever we would recommend, it would be to as well utilize that office's footprint and either expand that office and make that one unit, or have that office partner with the central office that currently exists.
And I would say that, when we were benchmarking, we did basically tip of the iceberg look at what these peer institutions were doing. We have an idea now of some places that are doing some things well, as far as we can tell. But I was really curious to actually schedule interviews with some of these places and say, okay, well, how did you do this? How did you set this up? And especially the places that are of similar size and have similar academic missions. And so I think that this is a jumping off point and would definitely be an invitation to look into more ways, specifically tactics, whatever people are willing to share with us, of course, but just learning more about what other places are doing.
One question from Dean James, I think, in the back.
So I've got 126 questions, but I'll restrict myself to two questions, one reasonable and one unreasonable. So the reasonable one, my understanding, at least within Goizueta, I don't know if other schools have this challenge, is that even after we go through the process of onboarding students, one semester for one professor, and get it all working, if those students then next semester work for a different professor, you basically re-go through the entire process. Did you look into that and what we might be able to do to avoid that? Because my understanding is that's not common to every university. So I'm not sure why it's a little different at Emory and what we could do about that.
I'll take this as a first pass, but I do believe it's because we set that future term date, so the termination date, and then that really puts a guardrail on what the possibility is for the student. They've become an employee. I think we need to remember that. So what we're asking of them is we need to have an opportunity to transfer them, their employment status, to a different supervisor. But once we've set that guardrail or that end post, it makes it difficult to then take that away. So there is an opportunity, I think, for us to revisit how that process is being done, to open that door or leave that door open. We do need to be compliant, though, that if a student stops, we do terminate them so they don't continue to get a paycheck unjustifiably. So I think that we have to take a lot of what we do as we think about employees, not just students, and modify those types of applications or those standard operating procedures and overlay that onto the student process. We don't do that now. We've created a completely different roadmap.
Right, but once you terminate the student, why can't you rehire them using the same documentation you already got the first time?
That I don't know.
And I don't necessarily have an answer for that specific question, but just generally, like, we as units and supervisors are managing our own requisitions, right? So there's nobody that has great insight into all the requisitions and all the opportunities for the students. So if we can open that door a little bit and create like a one-stop shop, then hopefully we can help more easily transition people between roles and jobs and requisitions, because I think in the absence of that transparency, it feels safer to just term, rehire, term, rehire. And so we've gotten into that cadence because, again, we just don't have the insight and transparency into the jobs and the opportunities that the students need. So hopefully we'd like to open those doors, and I could help Marvell in the business school, and then I could help Andrea in the School of Nursing, and it'll be a little bit easier for us as administrators and for the students themselves.
Okay, that was the reasonable question. The unreasonable so
I'd like to hand the microphone over to Marvell.
I'm not going to give it to Marvell now. So for the I-9 verification process, so this is basically verifying that they're legally allowed to work in the US. Is there any particular reason that, say, for US citizens, when we onboard them as students, we couldn't verify the US citizens at the point that they join Emory, and then forevermore they're I-9 verified while they're students here, because they're not going to lose that status?
I'll answer really quickly. Sorry, we actually heard that as a common ask across different parts, that they want that to be one adventure for the student. But Opus and PeopleSoft are two different programs. And so when you're bringing a student on to be a student on campus, that communication does not flow into PeopleSoft. And so you remember, we're going back to, we're hiring an employee who happens to be a student. And so right now there's no way for that data share to happen. So it was a big pain point when we spoke with the individuals from Opus and also others across campus. And one of the quotes was, why do we have to do this twice? It's a pain point. So I think if we can fix that, if we can take down a wall that allows the communication to be shared, that would be wonderful. But right now we have to think of these as two separate entities, a student and an employee. So you're hiring an employee who happens to be a student. So that process then now happens twice.
But there's no, as far as there's no legal reason we couldn't do that.
You're correct. You're correct, Dean James. It's about process. It's about what we've identified as the individual ways. Remember, there are 22 different units that hire students across the university. 22. And some people deal with 10% higher, some people deal with, like Andrea identified, are massively dealing with hiring and rehiring. But they've inherited a process that was taught to them maybe 7, 8, 10 years ago. So our recommendation consistently is to centralize this into one unit, and then as well, if you when you in your free time, when you read our about 50-page white paper, you'll see that we talk about going in and actually having the system individuals sit down and communicate back and forth and see what's possible, because individually everyone says it is possible, but no one is doing it.
I'll just add one final point, which is that, the systems that we create always reflect the people that create them. And so, when people are not talking to each other, the systems are not talking to each other either. And so it's really just a matter of figuring out a way for all of the systems to communicate, and all of the people making those systems work communicate as well.
Thank you.